It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You could find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com, and just contact me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Now, this is a fascinating show, especially if you're around my age. Our guest today is Jody Plauché. Now, you may not recognize that name, but when you hear this story, it blows the guy's head off on the camera, and it's the deputy who's screaming out, "Why, Gary? Why?" So I get chills thinking about this because I remember seeing this like at the time it happened. So fascinating story here. Jody Plauché. Mr. Plauché, are you there?
I am here.
Thank you so much. Before we get into the whole story of why, Gary, why, and all this content, I know you got a active Twitter there at J Plauché on Twitter, and your website is jodyplauché.net. You can find you on Instagram, too, as well. But tell us about yourself. Before we get into the story about the book, Why, Gary, Why? Who is Jody Plauché?
I guess the best way I could define myself is I got to go back to 1991. I got a call from a producer from the Geraldo Rivera television talk show that wanted me and my dad to come on. And so I decided, that's a free trip to New York City. Me and my dad decided to make a little mini vacation out of it. We went to a Yankees game. And basically, I just wanted to go be on TV just to go to New York City because I'd never been. And it wasn't until the show aired after the show aired, a kid in Baton Rouge was being molested by a pastor, and he had told his mother or whoever was taking care of him that he had seen me on that show, and because of seeing that, he came forward. So from that moment on, I was like, okay, I know this bad thing that we're going to get into happened to me. I was like, but I could share my story, and hopefully I could help others and keep them from getting molested and sexually abused and raped and sexually assaulted. And, so I, at that moment, made it my mission. So I made sure I graduated from Louisiana State University. When I left LSU, I moved to Pennsylvania for 7 years, working at a place called Victim Services Center of Montgomery County, Incorporated in Norristown, Pennsylvania. I was a community education person, so we would go out in the schools and do prevention, risk reduction programs to elementary school kids, middle schools, high schools. And so that, to me, is basically who I am, because just now that I'm not working at Victim Services Center, I still am someone committed to raising awareness and letting victims of sexual abuse know that they can be okay.
Real quick, too, before we get into more depth of your life, I noticed on your Instagram you're involved in boxing, professional boxing somehow?
When I lived in Pennsylvania, I would go quite often to boxing matches, so I'm a very big boxing fan. I've got pictures with Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier. I watched Bernard Hopkins train one day in New Orleans, so I'm a huge boxing fan. So if you see, I don't do it a lot on Instagram, but I got a folder on Facebook that says celebrities, and it's just me and a bunch of celebrities, and most of them I got at the boxing matches.
Yeah, back in those days, I was a huge boxing fan myself. Not so much anymore, But the old Tyson fights, I'd go down to Atlantic City all the time, watch the Tyson fights. And it's different now, you know what I mean? It's just not the same,
I'll tell you a funny, irrelevant fact about boxing in my family. Yeah. My mother and father went to the Superdome when Muhammad Ali had his rematch against Leon Spinks back in, 1978. And then me and my little brother, I was living in Pennsylvania. He was living in Baton Rouge, and he drove up to Memphis. I flew in from Memphis. My best friend drove in from Dallas, and we went and saw Mike Tyson fight Baton Rouge native Clifford Etienne in what would be Mike Tyson's final professional victory, as well as Ali's that my parents went to. So my parents saw Ali's last professional victory, and me and my little brother saw Mike Tyson's last professional victory. I bet many people can't say that.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, unless you're in the business or, a real fanatic, right? Let's get into it. What was your childhood like, Jody Plauché, before you ran into this karate instructor and all that kind of stuff?
I would say at that point in my life, so I probably started taking karate at 10. So up until from the time I was 6 years old, I started playing tackle football. I was on the team. I played Basketball started at 8 years old. Softball I was playing at 7 years old. Started playing baseball at like 9, 10 years old. So I was consumed with sports. So I was just all in the sport. Oh, and let's throw in soccer too. I used to leave my football games at halftime to go to my soccer games. So I was competing in all these sports, and that was pretty much my childhood. Is just being on a team, playing sports, whatever it was, getting off of school, going to practice, coming home, going to school, getting off practice, coming home. I mean, and then karate just happened to be an extra thing that my mother, because me and my older brother were into all these other sports, my little brother wasn't. She thought this might be something that can, get him involved, get him interested. So when she signed him up, she signed me and my older brother up too. And a neighbor from down the street, he signed up as well. So it was 4 of us that would go to these karate lessons. And we went to our first lesson, and it was taught by a guy named Rick. Rick was there for the first lesson. We went to our second lesson. Rick didn't show up. Yeah. So we went to our third lesson. No one knew where Rick was. So what they did was they turned our names over to an up-and-coming karate teacher who had just opened up a studio who was going to honor the commitment. I think we had 10 lessons. He was going to honor the 10 lessons, and if we liked it, then he would continue. We could continue taking it, and we would start paying him for the lessons. And that was Jeff Doucet. That would be eventually the man who would groom my family, groom me, sexually abuse me, kidnap me, and the sexual abuse went on for about a year before he eventually left town because he was avoiding. He owes people money, and he left town. When he left town, he took me. Well, when he took me, just him leaving town would have been one thing, but it became kidnapping.
Gotcha. Now, you said that he groomed your family, too. Describe that.
All right. Child molesters, pedophiles, or people who take advantage of children, they usually don't do like a rush job. They take their time. So they gain the trust of the family. So, Jeff's talking to, my parents after karate practice about how good we are, we got a future. And it got to the point to where Jeff would be like, you know what, why don't I just drop the kids off after practice? I got to head that way anyway. And, my mother's got my sister at home, so she's like, well, that'll be great. I don't have to leave and go pick them up. And he just really seemed like a great guy. I mean, my dad was real friendly, and so my dad would welcome me over to the house. He would be invited to family night on Saturday nights when we'd all get together and play Pictionary. What eventually became Trivial Pursuit, and he came over for that. And so he became kind of I don't want to say kind of like part of the family, but he was accepted into the family, and he was a family friend.
Was there anybody who had a bad feeling about him, like, say, something's just not right here?
It wasn't until I think my parents split up, and we went on a trip to. I think my parents may have still been together at this point, but it was right before they split up, and we went to a karate tournament in Fort Worth, Texas. And my uncle, he lived in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Actually, he lived in Dallas, and so we were going to go spend some time with my cousin since we were in the area, and then we would just come home 4 or 5 days later. So when we went to make the exchange, so Jeff had brought us to Fort Worth. When we went to go get with my uncle, Jeff gave me a kiss on the mouth, and my uncle was the one that went to my dad and said, look, something ain't right with this relationship. I don't kiss my own kids on the mouth. Something ain't right. And by that time, my parents were like, no, Jeff, two Jeffs. Uncle Jeff, Karate Jeff is really a nice guy. You just don't know him, he's harmless, because we had been groomed. The whole family had been groomed. And so what was obvious to somebody else, and I address this in the book, I mean, if it's obvious to somebody else, you might want to pay attention and listen, because you're not seeing the same thing that they're seeing. You should make that point again. What's obvious, you got someone who's not hypnotized in a situation, sees something, stop and listen. Right? What year was that when he's kissing you on the lips? What year is that? 1983. I just turned 11, summer of 83. Yeah,
1983. I'm probably a little older than you. 1983. Oh, yeah, I'm a lot older than you. 1983. I already graduated high school.
Well, I just turned 50, so.
Yeah, I'm about to turn 60. Yeah, I'm 59. But, so 1983. Yeah, that would have been a big, shocking incident for a grown man to kiss a 10-year-old boy. Now, how is he grooming you?
Same way, just being nice, giving me special privileges, letting me drive, let me, maybe give me an extra $5 at the arcade, showing me more attention. come hang out with me, come sit with me, let's go watch TV, just little things like that to kind of control me, get me to where I wouldn't tell, because he doesn't want to start touching me inappropriately without that assurance that I'm not going to tell. So what they do is they test boundaries. So they do little behaviors that could be either written off as an accident, like when I see like someone tickling a little kid, it just bothers the heck out of me, because that to me is a grooming, a testing the boundaries activity. That's like number one, because then if, let's say the grown-up male adult, let's say Uncle Paul's tickling his niece, and then he cops a feel, and that niece freaks out about it and says, "What are you doing?" He can go, "Oh, it was an accident. I didn't mean to. I accidentally did that." And then everyone goes, "Oh, okay, it was just an accident. He didn't mean it." And everything just kind of goes back to normal. Well, Uncle Paul now knows he can't mess with that niece. He's got to find another niece. So they do things to test boundaries. I think Jeff started when we were stretching. It didn't appear on my radar, but he would make us do a split, and he would get behind us, and he'd hold our legs, and he'd push us down a little bit. Well, he's grabbing us by our waist while we're doing a split, and he's like, "Oh, can you feel it in here?" And he'd reach inside my inner thigh, and, I can feel the tightness. "Oh, yeah, come on, you got to stretch. You got to be able to do good kicks." And that never registered that that's what he was doing. When it did register in my mind is probably a couple months later, maybe a couple weeks later, but, it was all in a couple months time frame, is he said, "Oh, hey, who wants to drive the car?" "Me, I want to drive the car." So we all wanted to drive the car, so he put me on his lap. I'm driving the car. My hand's on the wheel. I got 3 other people in the car that I'm responsible for driving. He's got his one hand on the stick shift, and he's working it was a standard, so he's working the clutch and the stick shift. Well, his other hand is rubbing my private parts. Well, it only stayed there for like 2 seconds. So it was testing my boundary. So if I'd have said, "Oh, Jeff, wait, your hand's in my crotch," he'd have been like, "Oh, my bad, accident, I won't do it again." It was an innocent kind of thing where it was just there for 2 seconds, and it went away. And that's when I really thought, okay, like Jeff might be one of these people my mom had told me about that might try to do things with kids. I don't think she went into details of what do things meant, but she had warned us about that. There was a made-for-TV movie called A Fallen Angel. She sat us down and made us watch it when we were kids. I think that aired in '81. And so I had that on my radar. So whenever he did put his hand in my lap, I thought, "Ooh, maybe he's one of these people." But by the time he actually started going into, full intercourse, if you want to call it that, or rape, if you want to use the right term, by the time he started doing that, I was already, I guess, under his spell.
Yeah.
But you're looking over probably a 4 to 5 month period. He took his time to work on me.
Okay, 2 questions. One is, now what about the other boys, your friends? Was he also doing the same kind of things with them?
Like my older brother, no. My younger brother, he witnessed some things, because a lot of times it would be me and him in a hotel room staying with Jeff. I suspect there were others. Now, I know for a fact there were a couple others, because I saw it. And He made me and this one kid do things. So, I know that for a fact. That's not speculation. I've had another kid, one of the 2 others than me. Like when Jeff confessed, he confessed to 2 other boys. And the one other boy I saw, I witnessed it. And then the one I've never met, but he messaged me on Facebook maybe a year and a half ago and just said, "Hey, this is my name, and I was a victim of Jeff too." So I have had contact with him. And actually his dad and my dad were really good friends, but they're both gone now.
Gotcha. And now, as a parent, right? Because you're right. We all talk to our kids about this kind of stuff. Hey, if somebody touches you, hey, be careful. That kind of stuff. But we're thinking that they think like we think. Now, and that those little subtle kind of conditioning things, that little subtle things. How do we teach a kid to be suspicious even of what could be an accident?
All right. Well, now I've kind of changed my mentality as far as how do we teach a kid on, recognizing that. I mean, it's important. I would never say not to go over that, just like you would fire safety or, home alone safety. I would include touching safety as well. But I would say to the parents, keep your eyes on your children and don't let them go away with anybody. Don't let them have sleepovers, spend a night. Not even with, your family members, but that's me coming from a paranoia standpoint. But I would rather be that paranoid and not have my kid be molested than be like, oh yeah, you can go sleep with your cousins, and then they get molested. So I put the onus on the parent.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with nothing wrong with being paranoid, at all. We had a little incident where at school, at preschool, where one of the other parents, this mother of another kid, was playing this game, and she was calling it the pocket game, where she would pretend to steal money out of kids' pockets, and I encouraged them to pretend to steal money out of her pockets. Now, to me, that's just so over the line. Just in every possible way. That's insane. Yeah,
if I had kids, they wouldn't be playing the pocket game. I can assure you that, and it would be addressed very quickly. I think Uncle Roy, was his name. Saturday Night Live did a skit. And one of the things was Uncle Roy would tell the little girls to, get the candy out of my pocket. And they're reaching in his pocket and digging it. And, they were obviously they were playing a pocket game. And Uncle Roy was a legit pedophile that was his character on Saturday Night Live. Like, they could never air that today. But people would get too offended. But I'm cool with it simply because back in, 1978, 79, when that aired, they weren't talking about that. They weren't talking about it in 84 until the moment we'll get to here in a little bit.
Oh, and that was Buck Henry, who is the comedian who played that character. And you're right. If people saw that, if they put that on like in prime time today, people would just have a heart attack. It was
Karens would melt down all over.
It's just and then what are we getting to today that you're about to tell me? What's this?
Do what?
You said until we get to that period of time you're about to tell me about now.
Oh, no. I said when we get to it later on. They didn't talk about child sexual abuse until Daddy shot Jeff. Oh. I mean, that wasn't something that was on the news you'd hear about. And then, like I said, they did have that one on kind of like, it wasn't kiddie porn, but it was like taking pictures of kids. Like, that was, Fallen Angels was about that. But they did have that. But for the most part, it wasn't something that was talked about. And I forget, it had to be 2002, 2003, when the whole Catholic Church scandal in Boston was erupting and going crazy, and it was all in the news. I went to this meeting. It was Survivor Network of Those Abused by Priests, SNAP. And it was in Philadelphia, so I went to it. And there was an old former Catholic deacon who was talking about when he first became aware of the practice of the Catholic Church just shipping away pedophiles, like, Father Paul has been accused of molesting this 8-year-old boy. They just shipped Father Paul away. They didn't fire Father Paul. They didn't file a police report. They just shipped him away so he could do it again. And then when he did it again, they just shipped him to another place. And so I was talking to this guy, and he said that in October, he said it was 1984. He was in Lafayette, Louisiana, and this kid came forward, and that's the first time he was aware of them shipping away the kids. Now, Lafayette's only about 50 miles from Baton Rouge. So back in 1984, I'm pretty sure they were getting the Baton Rouge local news. So I went up to him after and I said, do you remember what month that was when you found out about the Catholic priest being shipped away? And he said, yeah, it was October 1984. Well, Daddy's shooting occurred March 16th, 1984. So you can't tell me, you cannot convince me, there's nothing that can convince me that little boy didn't see that news story. Because it was on the news. I mean, my dad wasn't indicted till 9 months later, so it was on the news pretty much every day for almost a year. You can't tell me that little boy didn't see that story, and that's what led him to tell.
Yeah. Now, tell me about your dad, Gary. Now, that's a pretty bold move, man. What kind of guy was he before the shooting? What kind of guy was your dad?
He's the same guy before the shooting as he was after the shooting.
Yeah.
My dad was a very, very generous guy. He was an entertainer. He loved animals. He would pick up stray animals, dogs, cats. I mean, it wasn't uncommon. I mean, we had a farm in this household growing up, and he never told us no, we couldn't have it. We had raccoons, ferrets, cats, dogs, all kind of things. A iguana, a hamster, all kind of. I mean, so my dad loved animal nature. He loved entertaining. I mean, that was his job. Basically, he was a salesman, but his job was to go out and treat people to lunch and have them like him. And so that was my father. So, and he also coached all of our little leagues. So if I'm playing football, basketball, baseball, or soccer, he was a coach on one of those teams. When my little older brother was in a different age bracket, I think he coached my brother's team, but he always was involved with the youth sports. And so that's how he became, I want to say, so popular, is because, hundreds of kids knew him growing up. Their parents knew him. I mean, he was their coach. And so my dad was very beloved in the community before he ever pulled the trigger.
And was he like a gun guy? Did he have guns around the house all the time?
Yeah, he was not a gun guy. He took, I think, my little brother hunting one time, and they shot a leaf. You know, I mean, he would take us hunting, but we'd never kill anything. But, you know, he was just a kind-hearted, generous, and like I say, give the shirt off your back. I mean, he literally gave the shirt off his back to Jeff. One time after Jeff had stayed over one Saturday night, it was Sunday, and we were going to go over to my grandparents' house, my father's parents' house, mind you. And so we went and brought Jeff back up to the karate studio and dropped him off. Well, as soon as we turned around to go back home, all of a sudden Daddy starts crying. We're at this red light, and he's crying. And I'm like, what's wrong? And he just goes, he's so pitiful. He doesn't have anybody. So my dad turned the car around, went back, picked him up, brought him to the house, let him shower in the back, gave him a fresh shirt out of his closet, and he brought Jeff to Sunday dinner with my dad's parents. That's the kind of man my dad was.
And just, you know, it's so fascinating when you were talking about how he was a coach and he coached all these kids. How you have one guy who's coaching because he loves kids and he wants them to enjoy their sports, and another guy who becomes a coach or a karate teacher because he wants to exploit. You know, like how did two human beings grow up on the same face of the earth, and one guy with one motive and one guy with these crazy motives? It's just, how does that happen?
Well, that's another thing I tell people. In order for a child molester to molest kids, they got to be around kids. They got to have access to kids. So they're going to be your karate teachers. They are going to be your football coaches. They are going to be your family members, your teachers, people who have access to children. But yeah, you know, I never even considered that. Like, just when it comes to coaching, like, you know, here's Daddy doing it for good and Jeff doing it for evil. And I came really close to dedicating my book to all the coaches growing up who never molested me. I almost made that dedication, but instead I went with my mother and Mike Barnett. Mike Barnett being the police officer who, when I was kidnapped, my mother called him. He worked for the sheriff's office. He came to the house. He's the one that set up the wire tap. He's the one that set up the recording, the phone calls. He's the one with the notepad that would tell my mother, ask Jody if he has a jacket, because we were saying we were in New York City in February, and we were in California, and the temperature was like 20 degrees in New York, and it was 78 degrees in California. So it was little things like that they used to kind of help locate me. So, and Mike was a big part of that. So that's why Mike gets that dedication. And he's also the same cop that yelled, "Why, Gary, why?" Right.
Now, so I guess Jeff had to leave town because he owed money. Is that what happened?
Yeah, he had scammed some money out of, actually, it was one of my dad's friends. My dad introduced Jeff to this guy. He owned like about 30 little convenience stores here around Baton Rouge area, and Jeff had came up with this idea to make an LSU bandana, kind of like the Pittsburgh Terrible Towel. You know, you can wave it at the game, and it was gold with purple stripes like a tiger, and so my dad's friend liked it, so he put in an order for like 15,000 bandanas, and Jeff was going to sell him the bandanas for $2. So it was costing Jeff $1. Jeff was selling to Don for $3, and Don was going to, for $2, and Don was going to sell him for $3. That's free enterprise, right? Yeah. Well, when Don gave Jeff the first $15,000 payment, Jeff blew the money. So he didn't have the money to get the bandanas because he blew the money. So instead of using the first $15,000 to pay for the bandanas and then getting the second $15,000 and blowing that, he blew the first $15,000. So he owed that money, and he had written some hot checks and stuff like that. So he's kind of going to have to face the music a little bit, and he didn't want to do that, like the little scared baby he was. And so he took me. We went to his mother's house in Port Arthur, Texas. She got him his brother's birth certificate, his brother Mike's birth certificate, so he could get a fake ID when he got to California. Now, I will say this. The mother did not know we were going to California. Jeff told her we were going to New York, and it was her belief that we were going to New York. So, yes, technically did she aid and abet kidnapping? Yes, by giving him the birth certificate. But she wasn't trying to aid and abet the kidnapping. She was trying to aid and abet her son so he doesn't go to prison or have to pay that money back. So she really was not in on the kidnapping.
Oh, you're a lot more forgiving than me, man. I tell you, whenever I hear those stories and people...
No. Oh, she was a horrible, horrible, horrible person.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, Jeff didn't like her, and I got one of the depositions, I think, or the statement that Jeff was giving the police. I still have all that scanned, and I can look at them. But, yeah, he did not like his mother because he alleged, now it's in the book too, but he alleged that his mother was dating men who would sexually abuse Jeff, and she knew about it. And he suspected basically she was getting money to, I guess, loan him out. I mean, human trafficking at its finest. She was, put it this way, that's perfect. Ilya Doucet, the founder of human trafficking.
It's very possible, and it's very possible that did happen. It's this kind of stuff is just so common. Now, how did he discuss with you? Hey, Jody, we're taking off. You're coming with me.
He said this. He said, if I don't get the money, I'm leaving town. I'm going to California. I'm bringing you with me. That's more how it went down. And so the day of, that was like probably 2 to 3 weeks before he took me. The day of, he came to the house, knocked on the door, asked my mother, could I borrow your car? One of the other kids in the karate school, his parents were building a house down the street. And so Jeff's brother owned a carpet company. So they were supposed to go install the carpet. So Jeff said he was going to go check on it. Well, instead of going to check on the carpet, we went to his brother's Mike's house, got a few clothes and my sleeping bag because it was there, and we left Mike's and we went to the mother's house in Port Arthur. And we were there. That was Sunday, February 19th. And then we were there that Monday. We went to Sulphur, Louisiana, to one of Jeff's uncle's house so they could hopefully borrow some money. And I don't know whether the uncle gave it to Jeff or not, but somehow he came up the money to get the bus ticket, and we left like 11 o'clock on that Tuesday. My mother and the police arrived about noon on Tuesday looking for me, so we had just got out by an hour.
Oh, because you're. How did they know to call the police?
My mother, no. So Jeff had his mother call my mother and say, "Jody's here with me. Jeff's bringing him back in the morning."
Right.
Okay, so Sunday night, my mother was like, "All right, Jody will be back in the morning." Well, when I wasn't back Monday, that's when my mother called the police.
Gotcha. Okay, so we're talking to Jody Plauché about his book, Why, Gary, Why, the Jody Plauché Story. And this is the story of that, when you see they're walking the criminal through the courthouse there. And
the airport.
Airport, that's right, it was the airport, right. And his dad's on the payphone. It was a spur of the moment thing. He saw him walking by, turns around with this gun, blasts his head off. And now, how did they rescue you from this kidnapping?
All right, so we took the bus to Los Angeles. We left on that Tuesday. We got there probably early Thursday morning. We hung out all day. Eventually, we got a room in Anaheim, and then the next day we went to Disneyland. He took me to Disneyland, and after Disneyland, we got a room at the Samoa Motel. It's located at 425 or 435 West Catella Boulevard at the corner of Harbor and Catella. It's now a Great America's Inn, or America's Best Value Inn, and we got a room there, and that's where we were. And he had let me call my mother that Sunday. So I left Sunday. I didn't speak to my mother for a week. And he said, call your mother and let her know she's okay. So I went to the front desk. I gave him like $5 to make a long-distance phone call for like 2 minutes or whatever. So I called my mother, let her know I was okay. And then eventually, over the next couple days, Jeff would make a series of calls to my mother demanding that she meet him in New York, grab the other 3 kids, bring them, meet me in New York. And they got in a fight. I was out of the room. I was in the hot tub. And when I came back in, Jeff was upset. He's like, call your mother, let her know you're okay. Me and her just got in a fight. And because I guess she wouldn't agree to go to New York, even though we weren't there. And so I called my mother, collect. By this time, we were running out of money. So we called my mother, collect, and she asked for time and charges. For those who aren't those that remember payphones back in the day, what it is a collect call. You'd call long distance, and you'd have the person on the other end that you were calling pay for the phone call. And so my mother asked for time and charges. So whenever I hung up the phone, or Jeff hung up the phone, whoever was talking to my mother last hung up the phone, the operator came back on the line and told my mother that call was 11 minutes long and it was going to be $6. Well, that's when Mike Barnett got on the phone and said, look, this is an FBI investigation. I need to know exactly, it's involving a kidnapping. I need to know exactly where that phone call came from. And they told him that it was room 38 at the Samoa Motel, Anaheim, California, 425 Catella. And shortly thereafter, the police came busting in the hotel room. They opened the key. They put the guns on me. They put the guns on Jeff. One cop walked around the bed and looked at Jeff and said, I ought to punch you in the blanking mouth. Mm-hmm. And they took me out of there, and that was the last I ever saw Jeff.
Let's back up just a tiny bit. And by the way, the whole business with the collect call, I'm very familiar with what you're talking about. But now,
well, I knew you would.
Yeah.
It's the iPhone generation people that don't put that in.
So true. Now, but backing up just a little bit, he wanted your mother to take your brothers and go to New York City. Why?
That's what he was saying. He didn't mean it. He was just trying to throw her off the scent.
Okay.
But I'll tell you a very, very important thing that happened in these phone conversations. He did say to my mother, if you don't meet me in New York City, you will never see Jody alive again. And what that did is that took a simple kidnapping and turned it into a death threat, which made it aggravated kidnapping, which is mandatory life. So people go, oh, Jeff would have got out. No, Jeff was never getting out. They were going to send him to the penitentiary for the rest of his life. And to be honest with you, even to this day, I still would have preferred that. Daddy let it, because we're all going to die. Okay, we're all going to die. Jeff don't even know he's dead yet. He still don't know he's dead.
Right.
So Jeff got off easy. Now, would I like to see Jeff go through life at hard labor for however long that would be for a kidnapping pedophile? That I would have preferred that punishment.
Once again, we're talking to Jody Plauché. Why, Gary? Why the Jody Plauché story? It's in paperback on Amazon. Great reviews, 4.5-star reviews, and also too, it's coming out in an audio book very, very shortly, by the end of August. So keep an eye out for that. Now, so and then you get on separate planes. You're on the same plane. You're going back. What happens now?
No. Okay, all right. So no, we were separated. Like I said, when I left the hotel room, I never saw Jeff again. They took me from the hotel. I guess it was a motel. The motel room. They took me to the police station where they interviewed me probably for 2-3 hours, and they were just basically taking my statement. And then towards the end, that's when they were like, "Well, where did he sleep? We slept in the same bed. Well, what did he wear? He wears underwear. I wore my underwear. I mean, that I was telling the truth." And so once I left they didn't believe me. They knew I was lying. Then they took me to the hospital, and they did a full, complete physical examination and a rape kit. So basically, and I was watching this video this girl had made talking about the case, and people were giving her the business about saying they found Jeff's DNA, and they were like, oh, in 1984, they didn't have DNA. I was like, maybe she was trying to be nice. I mean, they found, let's say, DNA material. So they did the full rape kit, and that's so that would have been like February 29th. I was returned March 1st. It was a leap year. 84 was a leap year. And so I was returned March 1st. I flew out of LAX at like 1:15 in the morning to New Orleans, and Jeff wasn't flown home till March 16th. So we were on two separate flights, over 2 weeks apart. But the first week, of course, when I got back to Baton Rouge, they took me to the police station, and I denied everything because I knew I had gone to the hospital. I knew the rape report would come back positive. So I kept my mouth shut, and it was a week later. It was on my sister's birthday, March 9th, 1984. Mike Barnett came to the house, sat my mother and father down, and revealed the results of the rape kit, which had the DNA, to put it nicely. And so when my mother sat me down that afternoon, because she had picked me up at the bus stop, so I knew. I was like, oh, Lord, all right, time to face the music. And so she sat me down, and she said, Mike Barnett came over, and the rape kit came back, and it was positive. And I played stupid. I said, what does that mean? She said, it means Jeff fooled with you. And I was like, yeah, he did. I mean, I just came out, yeah, he did. And then we talked for a little while, and when it was time to go play, I went and got on my bike, rode to my friend's house, and that was the best I had felt in over a year. I felt like I could be me again. I felt like I wasn't under his control anymore.
Yeah, that's very common, too, for the kids to deny it. If you ever read the probable cause affidavit in the Jeffrey Epstein case, the first one in 2008, when the police would go around to the homes of these young girls and knock on the door at dinner time and confront the parents, the teen girls would almost always deny it and then break down later on and tell what really happened. Why do you think that is? You're studying all this. Why do the kids deny it?
I think probably the number one reason, and that's why I make sure I stress this in the book, because Mike Barnett told my mother, she said, look, you need to remain calm when you break this news to him. Mm-hmm. Don't show that it's upsetting you, because your reaction, if you overreact or you react harshly, he goes, that could have a more detrimental effect than the actual sexual abuse if you don't respond correctly. And, again, that's addressed in the book, too. And I think that that's what it is. They don't want their parents to know. They don't want to upset their parents. And so they just keep it's easier to just keep your mouth shut.
Okay, so I guess the next big incident is good old Jeff is getting off the plane, right?
Jeff's getting off the plane. Okay, so even to this day, like this girl, this woman, she did a video, and she posted it on Facebook on June 18th, and it was talking about probably maybe like a 5 or 6 minute video talking about the case, but she's putting on makeup as she's talking about the case. I thought it was pretty cool. I saw it a couple months ago. I reached out to her on Twitter and said, hey, good job with telling the story. You got most of your facts correct. You said the name's wrong, but everything else was pretty good. And so she was like, oh, thank you. So the other day, someone tagged me in this post on Facebook that was posted June 18th, and she said, Jody, have you seen this? And I messaged back. I said, yeah, actually, we follow each other on Twitter, and we've communicated. And at that moment, and this was like 3 days ago, at that moment, she had 220 comments and like 800 views. Well, I don't know what happened in the last 2 days, but it's got over 1.1 million views and over like 2,000 comments. And I read them. I comment back and forth because people say things like, oh, the police were in on it. The police set him up. Not true. It was not the police. Now, there was someone who gave my dad the information. That guy's name was Bob Shadell. He was a program director at Channel 2, WBRZ TV here in Baton Rouge. And my dad, actually, when he was in college, he used to work at WBRZ as a camera guy. He worked there. So he knew all the people behind the scenes, in front of the scenes. He knew everybody that worked at that news station. He was on their bowling team with them. And the other thing is, Channel 2 is located on Highland Road, and they used to have a popular restaurant in Baton Rouge called the Cotton Club. Well, that's where Dad did most of his business. And so he was sitting in the Cotton Club that Friday having gumbo, and Bob Shadell said, hey, Gary, when are they bringing your boy back, talking about Jeff? And Daddy said, oh, I think he's back already. And Bob's like, no, he's not. And Daddy said, well, they're not going to tell me. And Bob said, well, I'll find out for you. So he got up, went to the payphone, made a call to Channel 2, told my dad he'll be in at 9:08 tonight. Now, did Bob Shadell think Daddy was going to shoot him? Absolutely not. Did he think that he was creating some type of news story that would be interesting with Daddy maybe going to start a fight with him? I think that was kind of the intention. So I think that Daddy was manipulated in a sense that they told him when he was coming back.
Okay. Now, oh boy. Was he drinking between the time?
All right, so he was drinking, but, I mean, to me, he had a couple beers. He wasn't drunk.
Okay.
Which actually, I think it would be better if he was drunk, because people think that's a great shot with him being sober, so think of how great it would be if he was drunk. But that makes him more of a hero, I think.
Yeah.
No, so with that information, Daddy had that knowledge. My grandparents came and picked us up because it was Daddy's weekend to have us. They came and picked us up and brought us out to our camp on False River, which is a lake about 45 minutes away in Point Coupee Parish. And Daddy actually made it out to the river that night. But when he got there, he stopped off at the convenience store. He called his best friend, was talking to him, crying. He had been wanting to know, like, the details of what had happened to me. And I think my mother had given him, like, kind of like a bit of information he probably shouldn't have had at that point, which I specifically told her not to tell. And he just couldn't take it. And I don't think he had a plan. People go, oh, that was the most premeditated murder I've ever seen. No. If Daddy would have planned it, he just screwed it up. But he went, he saw the cameraman, got on the payphone, and he actually was talking to his best friend. And if you watch the video from the beginning, and it's on my website if anyone wants to see the unedited version, which is graphic, I warn you. But Mike Barnett walked out first, and he looks behind the camera to see who's back there because a small crowd had gathered behind the camera, and they were trying to figure out, is it going to be a movie star? Who's coming? Why is the news here? And Mike said he saw those cameras, and he thought to himself, these people thinking they're going to see a movie star, and they're going to get two drunks and a pedophile. And he said right when that went through his mind, that's when he heard the gunshot. So Daddy tells his friend, oh, they must have taken him out another way because he saw Mike, but he didn't see Jeff. Well, Mike had gone and searched out the terminal, and Mike waves. The footage begins with Mike saying, come on, and you can see Mike turn and walk to go down the escalator or the stairs, whichever one they decided to go down. And that's when Jeff and Bud Connor, they come walking around the corner. And if you look, you can see Bud and Mike are talking. I mean, Jeff and Bud are talking. And Bud's telling Jeff, if you see anyone hit the deck, I'll cover you. Their goal was to make sure he got, to jail safely. And You can see Jeff and you can see Bud. They're both looking back behind the camera. Now think about this: that camera's got bright light, so they can't hardly see. And if you watch the tape where you see the blue paint, the wall goes from white into blue. That it was recessed about 3 feet to put the phone so people wouldn't be standing blocking that wall. So they're looking to their left, and Daddy's to their right. But at first they can't even see the payphones because they were in the wall. And so they're looking. They never even thought to look right. And then that's when Daddy had to open shot, turn, shot him once behind the ear. He technically died the next day, but he pretty much was dead before he hit the floor. Bud, of course, was none too pleased with my father's action. He dropped to one knee, grabbed his gun. Mike ran and shielded my father from Bud because Bud probably would have shot him because Bud didn't know what was going on.
Right.
Bud gets up, walks over, puts the gun in my dad's head, and you can hear all this or you can see it and you can hear it. He calls my dad an SOB, and then he turns around to go tend to Jeff, and you can hear him kind of shake his head, and he says some choice language, and kind of rolls Jeff over. On the video on my website, the cameraman zooms in, and I mean you could just see he was dead, and you can hear Daddy crying. But at one point, Bud gets up and looks at Daddy, and it was like, "Why did you have to do this?" And that's when my dad looked at Bud, and he looked up and he said, "If he'd have done this to your family, you'd have done the same thing. You don't know." And so my dad, he's often misquoted. They say if he'd have done this to your kid, but he said no. And you can hear it if you put the headphones in. If he'd have done this to your family, you'd have done the same thing. And so Mike said, book him attempted second-degree murder. They upgraded that to second-degree murder the next day when Jeff died. And after that, my dad went to a psychiatric hospital for about a month. And then my parents got back together because my dad was not supposed to be drinking, and that's why my mother kicked him out. So Daddy moved back home about a month later, and I started playing baseball again. I was on the summer league team. Daddy would go to the games, and it's funny looking back because we're out at the park, and this one judge just died. He wasn't a judge at the time, but he was working in a DA's office. Two of the coaches for one of the teams we played against were working in the DA's office. Daddy is, just a fan at this point. He's not a coach because, he couldn't at this point. And then the DA, her name was Sally Bush. I'll never forget it. I mean, he wasn't a DA at the time, but he ended up running for DA and becoming the DA, the one that eventually was the DA when my dad was prosecuted. His beautiful daughter would be hanging out there, and I had like the biggest crush on his daughter, but I couldn't go talk to her. What are they going to say? Hey, it'd be a real weird family Christmas if your dad puts my dad in jail for life, and we hit it off. But so that was kind of weird looking back. But again, we're hanging out in the summer at the baseball fields like we were doing the year before, or the 2 years before. I mean, so it really wasn't that much of a difference.
Okay, so real quick, you can find that video on jodyplauché.net. Now, but okay, so your dad he went to a mental hospital at first for a month. I guess dried out, right? And then he was let out on bail.
He got out on a $100,000 bail.
Okay.
He shot him on a Friday. He posted bail Monday. I think his lawyer's the one that put him in a psychiatric hospital.
Gotcha.
And so eventually my dad would fire that lawyer, who actually, that video I was telling you about where that got like the 1.1 million views.
Yeah.
Someone at the time who worked for that lawyer posted, I was working on that case back then, and I asked her, I was like, who was the lawyer? And she said, oh, it was Foxy. So she was just commenting on Facebook the other day. But anyway, so he fired Foxy because they were offering my dad a deal with no jail time, and Foxy wouldn't take it because Foxy figured in Baton Rouge in 1984, 12 people weren't going to find my dad guilty of murdering the guy that had molested his son. That wasn't going to happen. So he decided to take a chance. Well, you don't do that. Also, he had signed a book and movie deal, which basically guaranteed that it would go to trial so they could have the court records to write the book. Yeah. And so because Foxy had signed a book deal, I'll never forget, I came home from school one day, and this isn't in the book, so you're going to get a little bonus, but my dad and the judge were fraternity brothers. And I remember coming home from school one day, and we had the answering machine, and my dad hit play, and I heard, Gary, this is the judge. We need to meet at my office at 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, they're both dead, so I feel comfortable saying that. But, I mean, I played Little League with his son, the judge's son. So when I found out that judge was going to be the judge, I never in my mind thought Daddy would go to jail. I always thought that's Daddy's friend, he's going to take care of Daddy. And, what ended up happening is they offered that deal, they ran it by the Doucet family. They said, look, we're offering Gary manslaughter, which carries anywhere from 0 to 40 years. And they said, okay. They agreed to it. And they were pleased with the manslaughter. Now, when the judge did the sentencing, he did, 7 years hard labor, suspended, 5 years probation, 300 hours of community service. So the only time my father did in jail was that Friday night through that Monday morning. And then he got probation, which he finished, and then went back to drinking. And my mom left him again. So, well, I'll tell you, no, my dad was funny, too, so I'll tell you a funny thing. So back in 92, 93, this just got posted like 6 months ago on YouTube. It was called American Justice. It came on A&E, and they did one called Vigilantes, and they had Bernard Goetz and my dad on there, and my dad was the second one. So they did an excellent job with it. Well, at one point, Bill Curtis goes, Gary, having been upset, filled with anger, and an alcoholic, turned violent or something like that. So I called my dad. I'm like, what'd you think? He goes, I didn't like it. I said, what do you mean? Now, at this point, my mother's living in Biloxi. She's been there for 3 years. She done left me. They never got a divorce. They just separated. And so I go, Daddy, I think they did a really good job. He goes, well, they called me an alcoholic. I said, well, Daddy, you are. He goes, I know. I just didn't want your mama to know. I'm like, I'm pretty sure she's aware that you're an alcoholic. But he said, I didn't want your mama to know. I didn't want your mama to find out. He goes, I know. I just didn't want your mama to find out.
Well, I'd say I'd have a drink with your dad anytime, man. Okay, I would.
No, you'd have more than one, man.
Yeah. Listen, Bernard Goetz too. Now, was Bernard Goetz on that show? Because I tried to get him on this show, and he wouldn't do it.
So, I don't think he was. I don't think he was interviewed. Daddy was interviewed for the show. I think they may have shown. Daddy sat down and did an interview with him. I was living in Dallas or Irving, and so I wasn't available for the shoot. I'm sure they would interview me, but. Bernard Goetz, I think they use like his confession tapes or like his arrest videos. I think they use that showing him talking and saying what happened. I don't know if he sat down to do. I imagine he doesn't do anything because you can't even. To me, you can't compare the two. Bernard, like Daddy said, a vigilante is someone who goes out looking for it, and that's what he did. Daddy's like, I didn't go out looking to shoot Jeff. That's just what happened.
Yeah. Bernard Goetz, he runs a squirrel rescue right now in Central Park. That's what he's devoted his life to saving squirrels.
Well, good for him.
Listen, Jody Plauché, we only have about 2 minutes left. What would you like to leave? I really enjoyed this interview, man. Thank you so much. What would you like to leave us with?
Probably the way I ended my book. I did a speech one time in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and it was a night of remembrance for those who had been like homicide and sexual abuse. And on the back of the program, it had a quote from Helen Keller, and it said, "The world is full of suffering, but it's also full of the overcoming of it." And so just because you've been through something tragic, look, I was sexually abused for a year, kidnapped, my dad shot the guy, and I do not subscribe to that, children are scarred for life if something like that happens. I'm not scarred for life. Maybe I am. I don't have any kids. Maybe that's why. But for the most part, I sleep well at night, and I know that, I've done as much as I could. And I want to do more. I want to do more to let people know that you can get through some tragedies. Now, obviously, if someone's kidnapped and murdered, that's a whole different story. But I'm talking about, when it comes to sexual abuse, that type of thing, with the proper support, you can be okay.
Yeah, I'm sure this book is doing a lot of good too. It's just fairly new, right? Just fairly came out new, 2019.
I would say it's fairly new. The reason why I still consider it fairly new is because it came out like 4 months before COVID, 3 months before COVID.
There you go.
And so all my speaking engagements I had, I'm actually doing one that was made up from 2020. I'm doing one next month in New Orleans for like attorney generals or something like that, or U.S. attorney. But I had like several. I had a trip to Whistler, Canada. I was going to speak at a conference there. That got canceled. Gulf Shores, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, South Carolina. So, I've been locked up and cooped up for 2.5 years, so I'm ready to open back up. I'm ready to go promote. I'm ready to go speak. I'm ready to just raise awareness and let people know they can be okay.
Thank you so much, Jody Plauché. The book is called Why, Gary, Why? The Jody Plauché Story. Plauché is spelled Plauche. You can find him on J Plauché on Twitter, jodyplauché.net, where you can see that video, which I'm going to go. I got to admit, I'm going to go there right now after we hang up, brother. I'm not going to lie to you, man. I'm not going to lie to you.
America's first viral video is what I call it.
His father was a hero in all this, Gary Plauché. May he rest in peace. Jody, and the audiobook's coming out soon. I tried to get Jody to do the audio, man. I think it would be perfect from your voice, because even people who comment on Amazon all say that your writing style, it comes from the heart. I'd love to hear you do the audio, but you don't want to do it. You don't have to listen to me.
I sat down with my business partners. We were trying, and we were hoping to get it turned into a documentary or docuseries, a feature film. But we tried it. I just can't do it. I'm not good at that. I got to know my limitations.
I would love to see a movie about this, or like you said, a series. Jody Plauché, you don't have what at the time?
I don't have my hopes up.
Ah, yeah. Well, because the best stuff never gets made. That's the problem. Jody Plauché, thank you so much, brother. I got to go.
All right, take care.
Thank you, sir. Good night.